Hello, dear friends. Welcome here. Today I'm going to be talking about natural family planning, and I thought that was fitting after my previous recording of my perspective on having children. Honestly, this is a lot of fun for me. I've always desired and dreamed since college to find time and a way to solidify and learn the things that I learned in college in a concrete manner. And typically, when you try to learn something, the best way to get it to solidify in your mind is to reiterate it. And if I were to reiterate these things just to myself or out loud, or even a recording that would only be for myself, I think I would not be very motivated to do it. And I would probably stop very soon after doing it. So this has been really fun. It's been really good for me to just be thinking of these thoughts and um, doing the research, remembering dates of things so that I kind of just have them in my back pocket when I'm in conversation because I'm usually able to refer to things vaguely. But I really wanted to work on also being able to solidify these concrete dates and phrases in my mind. So, anyways, just wanted to share that. And then I'm not going to go too much into like the background, but I do think it's important to just outline the teachings of the church and a few pieces of writing to read if you want to, spend your time looking into it further. That's a good thing. And yeah, I would encourage you to do that. But anyway, so just going to hop right in here. You could probably qualify this topic to death. I'm sure there's so many um, caveats that can be made and, making sure that you're addressing all of people's seasons and circumstances and things like that. I'm going to obviously try my best to be sensitive and thoughtful to those who might be listening. But I mean, my intention really is not to convict a person in their particular discernment or decisions in this manner. I think that's really good food for thought. I think we should be intentional about thinking about it. But again, that's not really my intention. So I'm not going to worry too much about stepping on anybody's toes. Hopefully that's okay. And hopefully it is not your toe that I am stepping on. But, anyways, hopefully that detachment, so to speak, is in my favor. And I can kind of talk about this in a manner that's, helpful to people. And hopefully maybe that might help you to be receptive to the things that I'm saying if it is something that is convicting to you. Anyways, I'm going to just keep going here. So, in the church, using contraception has always been morally wrong and sinful. Um, and when birth control was kind of coming out in the 1960s, Pope Paul VI actually created a commission to determine whether it was immoral to use birth control, and that commission was made up of Catholic couples and physicians. And actually, their conclusion was to lift the ban um, on contraception, in particular to birth control, because it was kind of a new thing coming out. And Pope Paul VI went against his commission and said no to that, basically. And in the encyclical Humani Vitae, he declared, which was written in 1968, he declared that it was intrinsically wrong. That's not new. There's past encyclicals like Casti Canu Be in 1930 that was written by, I believe, Pope Pius the 11th. And that also confirms the church's stance against contraception before this. Yeah, I just want to make that clear. We're talking about natural family planning. Contraception has always been sinful and immoral in the church. So anyways, I'm going to go into NFP because NFP, or natural family planning, people call it, or not people call it, that is what it stands for. It doesn't stand for anything else. That is permitted in the church. And Pope John Paul II summarized the church's teaching in this regard during an audience in Castel Gandolfo in 1994. And he says, therefore, when there is a reason not to procreate, this choice is permissible and may even be necessary. However, there remains the duty of carrying it out with criteria and methods that are respectful to the total truth of the marital act and its unitive and procreative dimension, as wisely regulated by nature itself and its biological rhythms. one can comply with them and use them to advantage, but they cannot be violated by artificial interference. So that is where the rhythm method comes in. I feel like the term natural family planning, like, it's such a thing. Like, it's kind of like a title. It's like its own entity, but I don't actually really see it like that. I mean, obviously, you need probably, for clarity's sake, you need a concrete way of communicating a certain idea to people. That makes sense. Um, but like, NFP is maybe the is a method, is the method in which you use knowledge of when you are fertile or not fertile. And the use of that knowledge of your fertility to either conceive or avoid having a child, like, that's NFP. Like, it's the method. So, I mean, sometimes it's just that sometimes, you kind of hear the term like, oh, NFP is wrong, or NFP is bad, or we don't do NFP. But, like, if you use any sort of basic natural knowledge that you have of your cycle, and so you know when you're fertile or not, and you use that information that you have, whether there's and it is not, and it doesn't even have to be like an official way you're using it, but it's just like even a vague knowledge of when your cycle is, and you know when you're ovulating or when you're not ovulating, and you use that information to either conceive a child or avoid a child. In my mind, like, the definition, like, I think it would be true to say that that's technically, quote unquote, NFP. So I think, anyways, I think people just, like, have, like, the stigma about it just because of its incorrect uses, and I'll get into that more later. I don't know, I kinda just wanted to put it out there because I've definitely heard that kind of, like, term being around. It's like, "Oh, we're against NFP." And it's not like these people don't know anything about their cycle, they do. I wanted to just give some, kind of, like, personal background to kind of where I've come at this point in time in regards to this topic. When I was in college and we were learning about natural family planning at some point in one of our classes. No, I don't think we were talking about natural family planning in and of itself, but maybe the notion of it within Christian doctrine, or one of the classes called magisterial thought, where we were going through the letters, and that was kind of one of the topics in there. And honestly, my formation prior to going to college, and I went to Our Lady Seat of Wisdom in Barry's Bay. I really like, I was uncatechized. I didn't even know a catechism existed until I went to college and learned that there was actually a book that told you and communicated all that the church's teachings were, and what I ought to believe as a Catholic, and how to think about things. And that was very mind-blowing to me because really before that, I didn't know anything. Anyway, so we're getting into, natural family planning, and again, I didn't really I really didn't really hear about that term. I didn't really know what it was. I wasn't really kind of interested in it at the time, but then we're going through it in class, I thought, "Oh, wow, like, this is really something kinda neat and cool I want to explore." Anyways, I went to my priest, or my spiritual director, who's a priest at the college, and he encouraged me to go to this training class, in, to go to this training class in Toronto and get my part 1 training in the method of Billings, let's say NFP, method. And my then fiancé, now husband, he encouraged him to go as well, I think, or I told him to come with me. Again, I don't think I really understood what I was kinda getting myself into, and he said yes. I think the priest encouraged us both to go. That's not one of the frequently asked questions in dating, like, "Oh, should my fee is it prudent for my fiancé and I to attend a NFP, or a NFP teacher training course together?" Because, I mean, looking back on it now and prior to it, I don't think I realized, like, how intimately the training is in terms of the information that you're given. But anyways, I think the priest, I think, believed that we had the maturity for it, and we were going to get married, and I think he saw that as a good a good preparation for marriage, and then also dual, thought that we would fit well to be teachers. So we went, and I mean, it is kind of amusing because a lot of the teachers a lot of NFP teachers are older, and it was a little amusing to find us in the room. Like, we were the youngest people in the room. My husband was, or my then husband was, or my now husband was 19, and it was just a bunch of women who are all over the age of 40. So there's I'm just gonna say my husband, me and my husband there, and he's the only dude, and he's the youngest dude, and everybody else is women, and they're all, much older. Anyways, it is kind of funny because as we're going through the training, and I think this might be kind of hard for somebody to conceptualize if they either, don't do this, or they haven't really gotten the inside scoop in terms of, like, how you would teach it to somebody else. Obviously, that's kind of particular. But just to kinda give you the gist, like, there's something kind of mathematical about it, or, like, logical about it once you understand the underlying principles of it. So, my husband's a very logical thinker. He likes he's very orderly. He kind of is able to break things down. He likes to break things down like that in a logical, reasonable format. And so he picked up on the pattern, picked up on the process, kind of, "Oh, when you see this thing, this is what you do next." Like, he kind of formulated that in his mind pretty quickly, and he was getting faster at it than I was. He understood it faster than I did, just because of the way he was processing it. And 'cause we would be given these kind of worksheets and scenarios that would kind of, like, lay out a woman's cycle and kind of what she's going through, and how would we address that based on, all these different things, or what is she supposed to do? Like, how is she supposed to label her chart and things like that. So we'd have to label the chart. And again, my husband was so fast at it, and it was just kinda getting so amusing because, all these women would were so impressed by him, and I just remember a few subtle comments they're about to start a sample, like an example lesson, and, the lady be like, "Oh, but Lincoln will understand this, like, he's got this down." And repeat, like, "This was supposed to be for me. I was supposed to be the one who was supposed to be good at this." Anyways, that's just a funny little anecdote as part of the story. But anyways, after that training, or during that training, something something started to become apparent to me that I didn't actually realize before. Again, I wasn't really thinking about this, and often you don't really think about this before you get married. And all of a sudden it became clear to me without realizing it, how, oh, like, very natural. I'm like, a lot of people could use this wrongly. And then also I thought, a lot of the scenarios that we were being given in the training was to kind of give guidance to the woman to avoid having children. And so, even though I didn't know much about it, there was something that was kind of off-putting about the whole thing. I didn't feel settled after it. I kind of felt a little uncomfortable with just, I don't think I could go through this training. I don't think I could keep going and learning more and get to the point where I'm, like, teaching people this method and talking to them about it, because it just seemed kind of dicey. Like, it didn't sit well with my conscience. So when I returned back from that training, I went to the priest and I told him my entire experience. And he was the spiritual director. He was the spiritual director of the board of the Billings. It's called, yeah, the organization is called Womb Canada. And Womb Canada is the organization that specifically does the Billings method in NFP, for NFP. I told him about it, and he encouraged me to actually, like, do a speech in front of the board about how I didn't feel comfortable in my experience, and how it kind of felt contraceptive, had a contraceptive vibe to it. And, anyways, I think that was really good. I never got fully trained in it because of that. I just never really sat well with my conscience to imagine myself sitting down with a couple, teaching them a method, teaching them about their fertility, and then giving them the ability to use that knowledge, to avoid having children. Not because I, like, assumed that if they, like, these people don't have good reasons or not, but if for whatever chance, they made a joke or something, or said something kinda subtle that would lead me to question or realize that they didn't really have a great reason, I wasn't very comfortable with that. So, that to say, mm, I definitely do have knowledge about using natural family planning. I and that was kind of my experience. And so I do definitely have thoughts about it. So I'm just going to jump right into those thoughts about the whole topic in and of itself. The first thing that and I'm going to kind of go from at a point of, things that I commonly hear. The first thing is, oh, NFP is bad because people use it contraceptively. And like I said before, NFP in and of itself is just using the knowledge of your fertility to either conceive or avoid having children. Prior to the use of it, it's purely just knowledge. And knowledge in of itself isn't bad. You can use that knowledge to do something bad. And that is why people often do with natural family planning, use it contraceptively. But that doesn't necessarily make the the knowledge bad, and it doesn't make um, using that knowledge bad, like using it in and of itself bad. So ultimately, I believe it to be a user issue, not the essence of in and of itself or the NFP in and of itself to be a bad thing. I think you often, though, hear that from those who maybe don't have many children or kind of starting off on the journey, or they're not married yet, they're engaged and they're zealous. I think that comes from a good place sometimes, like they want to search out truth. They want to make sure that once they're married, they're going to be doing the right thing. They're going to be doing the truthful thing, the thing that is most faithful and pleasing to the Lord. And so I do think it comes from sometimes a good place, but even zeal for our Lord can be misplaced as well. Sometimes I don't think people realize that you will maybe very well need it in your marriage, whether because you don't really know, like, you don't really know what's going to happen. And the knowledge of your fertility is kind of a gift. I think it's a gift that God has given us to help us understand our bodies and a sort of roadmap to read. And yeah, again, it can be used wrongly, but that doesn't make it wrong. So I'm going to just share a bit of my own personal use of it because I have always had the knowledge of it, but I never really used it actively in regards to avoiding having children when we got married because I wanted to have children right away. We both wanted to have children right away. And so since we immediately got pregnant, and obviously you don't get your cycle when you're pregnant, the need to use the knowledge that we had didn't actually come till much later. So my first two children are quite close together. And I shared in the previous recording how, the discernment that I went through to have our second baby. But just if you haven't listened to it, that's fine. Just a quick summary is that I got pregnant with my second child when my oldest child was only 3 months old. And I didn't really know what complications, I didn't really think of anything that would be complicated with that. I was very at peace with the decision. I was glad we did it. I'm still glad we did it. I have no regrets about it, but now experiencing that and the experience I went through with that has given me information now that I have needed and is good for me to have to help me make a better decision in the future. And I've utilized the knowledge that I've received to avoid conceiving a baby for a period of time because of the information I now know from the pregnancy for my second child. So when when I conceived my second child, I didn't realize this, but my milk supply basically just cut off. And it makes me still sad, honestly, to look back at those pictures where I didn't realize my milk supply had cut off. There are a few other different factors. I was a new mom. I didn't, I was cloth diapering, so I didn't really notice. There's no indicator on it, so I didn't really notice that his um, liquid intake was dropping, and so I wasn't noticing that he was peeing less and less and less. And losing weight is something that kind of happens slowly over time. And when you are with a baby constantly every day, you don't necessarily see those changes until you look at, a picture of them 2 weeks before and now, and you realize, whoa, there's a big difference. And so that's kind of what happened to me. I realized that my milk supply cut. I had to really fatten him up again and find milk for him. I definitely regret the uh, regret the lack of the lack of observancy, I guess, I had at that point. And because of that knowledge that I had, I mean, he's fine now, he's great, but knowing that, that affected my future decisions on conceiving my next babies, which is why they're further apart. I could get pregnant. I have always been able to get pregnant basically at 3 months for all of my children. But knowing what I know now, it didn't feel right to me. I discerned that. My husband and I discerned that we didn't want to put our baby on formula. We also had a hard time affording good quality formula, whereas breast milk is the best for the baby and is also free. So, we decided that we wanted to wait until our children were of an age that they were healthy, eating well, starting to eat solids well, eating other foods in the mix, so that when I had to transfer, or when I got pregnant and my milk would cut, and it has always cut ever since, every time I've gotten pregnant, that when we would switch them over to either formula for a bit of time, and then we have the blessing of being able to have access to unpasteurized milk, which all of our kids have gone on at like 9 or 10 months old. That's what we're comfortable with. Anyways, when we're able to get to that point, or we're close to that point, then we have used natural family planning to hold off conceiving for a period of time for the good of our other baby that we're also responsible for. That's definitely an important piece, is like my decision to conceive a new child actually directly affects my baby, my current baby, that I also am responsible and called to take care of well and be responsible for. So anyways, I think sometimes like a scenario that's a very particular scenario to me, but sometimes scenarios like that, it's like you can't really conjure that, like you can't really think of that ahead of time. You don't really know that that's what's going to happen to you, or you're going to be put in a scenario like that. So I definitely think having knowledge of your cycle, knowledge of your fertility is a good thing, especially when you don't really know what's coming down the pipe and you very well may need it. Some people kind of want to refuse the knowledge because they don't trust themselves with the knowledge. Like that's fair. I suppose then I would really kind of question, like, do you think that the best solution to that is to just ignore the fact that you don't trust yourself, or become the kind of person that you can trust with that knowledge? So like, for example, I think it's kind of like, defending yourself, where it's like, oh, I don't want to learn the moves to defend myself. I don't want to know what pressure points are the best to target on my attacker to defend myself, because I'm afraid that I might use it wrongly and use it on somebody else. It's like maybe that might be the case, but I think the larger question here is an issue of self-control. Being the kind of person that having that knowledge, you can be someone who can be trusted with it, and that you ought to be. The next notion I've heard thrown around before is that you should only have sex if you're open to life or able to conceive a child in that moment. And if you aren't ready, you should not be having marital relations at all until you are. The first thought that comes to my mind is that the church doesn't explicitly teach that anywhere. So that's kind of a self-inflicted principle that you're putting upon yourself. And I would just definitely take that to prayer, because I think we should always be kind of mindful and hesitant to make our personal beliefs or thoughts that the church doesn't even impose on us to be sort of this kind of dogmatic thing in our lives, and to be kind of weary of that. The Catechism teaches that there's actually 2 ends to the marital act. In paragraph 2363, it says, "The spouses' union achieves the twofold end of marriage, the good of the spouses themselves and the transmission of life." In other words, the unitive and the procreative is also terms that are often used. Sex is not just purely to conceive life. It's to also unite the spouses together. It's a gift to one another. That gift bears life, but it also bears fruit in other ways in your marriage that are also important. Unity, faithfulness. And so to limit the marital act to just this procreative nature, I think implies, definitely it definitely gives off a utilitarian sort of vibe to me, where the act is purely used to produce life, and that is all. Like, it's kind of just our bodies are just machines. The process is just a machine to achieve an end. a child. And that's not true. And that's not what the church says. But also, by that premise, that sentiment implies that you sort of believe that the marital act is purely only for procreation. And so, with that premise, you shouldn't be having sex while your wife is pregnant because there's life in her already. You can't generate new life. And so, it wouldn't make sense to be having marital relations because the procreative check mark has been done. And so, in a sense, there's nothing else left there. Again, I think there's something very flawed with that mentality and definitely something sort of missing there. Sometimes I think it comes from a self-imposed attitude that God is asking us to do the hardest thing. And God definitely asks us to do hard things, but sometimes those hard things are self-imposed. And I think we ought to really discern why we believe that we should be doing that. And oftentimes I think it comes from a place of pride, right? Like, there is definitely something to say or something, sometimes that's something that feels good to be doing the hard thing, to be suffering a lot, and you feel kind of self-righteousness, I guess self-righteousness to those who don't seem to be able to withstand as hard of a thing or don't have to go through as hard of a thing, and that you're kind of special because you do the hardest thing. And there's so many layers to that. It's like big onion of pride. You got to keep peeling back the layers of the different reasons of why, where your heart is and the intention with that. Recently, I went to a Lenten retreat, and the priest told this story, which I think kind of encapsulates it well. Basically, and I don't know if I'm telling this story completely correctly in terms of all its of its scenario, but the essential thing is this: is that a person came to the priest, wanting to do penance, and he insisted that he wanted to wear a hair shirt. Now, a hair shirt was a form of penance. It was a very itchy sort of garment that you would put under your clothes, and it would make you uncomfortable and itchy. And he insisted that that was the way in which he wanted to do penance, like because that was the most uncomfortable thing. And he thought, yeah, that would be the best way to kind of be humbled. And the priest said, sure, yeah, sure, you can wear the hair shirt, but instead of wearing it underneath your clothes, you have to wear it over your clothes. And the lesson there is not discomfort, like making yourself suffer in discomfort, but actually the embarrassment. And so the embarrassment is what is your penance instead. So the lesson here is that sometimes the way in which we want to sacrifice is not the way God wants us to sacrifice and practice humility, or the way that we want to be humbled. God wants to practice humility in another form. And again, just like the notion, like the Lord's ways are not our ways, his thoughts are higher than our thoughts. And we don't always understand the mind of God, and we should be careful to not believe that, what we believe is best and what we believe is the most kind of stringent and most holy is the thing that God is asking us to do. God calls us to holiness in ways that we don't expect. The last kind of sentiment I've heard thrown around is, just go with whatever. And my husband and I termed that to be called unintentional family planning. And I kind of talked about this again in the separate episode, but I like to assume that people kind of listen to each episode separate of itself. Like they're not going to go back and kind of connect the dots. But when I refer to unintentional family planning, I'm referring to those who just kind of say, like, just go with it, or we're just winging it. We're just going wherever the Lord takes us. If God wants to bring the baby, he'll bring the baby. And if he doesn't, he doesn't. And sometimes I think that's said with good sentiment. Like I think people are implying an openness with that. But I think avoiding and conceiving a child should be very intentional. So I believe it's important to say that you're open and ready to bring forth new life into the world, and then concretely prepare your heart, prepare your life, your family for that next baby. And if you are wanting to avoid having a child, you need to have grave and serious reason to do so. That is taught by the church, and I will kind of refer that closer to the end. I mean, obviously, there's going to be times where we're surprised by having a child, like we weren't expecting to get pregnant. And especially when you've just had a baby and you're breastfeeding and your cycle's kind of like all over the place. That's a place where sometimes there's a bit of uncertainty, and you conceive a child without necessarily like intending to. But for me, I like to operate on the assumption, especially when my fertility is unclear, like I'm breastfeeding and my cycle's kind of all over the place. I mean, I kind of just go on the assumption that, that joining together in the marital act has the potency to bear life. And that even in that time, if we're hoping to not get pregnant or we're trying not to get pregnant for the sake of the baby, and I still do, I just surrender that to the Lord. I don't get upset. I don't regret the pregnancy. I don't blame my husband. I just make peace with it, trust that that was part of the Lord's plan for our lives, and again, surrender that to Him. So the next part I'm going to kind of talk about is, well, when should you use it? When should you use NFP? Typically, you use NFP to avoid having children. That is true, and I'll get to that in a bit. But natural family planning is also used to help couples to achieve pregnancy. And I think sometimes, I mean, that's often not what it's emphasized for, because it's kind of easy or common sense to utilize the information of natural family planning to conceive a child. It's really not that difficult. You just know when you're ovulating and you do it then. It's not rocket science. But especially for a couple who, yeah, might be struggling, or for it seems like for whatever reason they are joining together in the times that they should produce a child, and for whatever reason it's not. And natural family planning can be a real gift, and has been a real gift to couples, to sort of see what's kind of going on, monitor what's going on in the woman's body. Maybe there's something that's not quite normal about her cycle. And so that gives them information to look into it further. There are rules, I guess, and it depends on what method you're familiar with. But just with what I know, there are ways in which you can utilize the information of your fertility to give yourself the best chance to conceive a child. Sometimes it isn't as easy as just coming together constantly during fertile fertile periods. Sometimes it is actually waiting for a bit, or waiting a couple cycles, in order for the marital act to give the best chance of a baby. But I'm not really going to go too much into that, because I actually don't have a lot of experience, and I don't have a lot of knowledge with couples who have infertility and their journey and their experience in that. So if that is something that you're struggling with, definitely seek out counsel and help, and talk to people who definitely do know more about it and can help you and assist you with that. So now I'm just going to go into the grave and serious reasons one ought to have to avoid having children. And I'm going to take two quotes, one from the Catechism, paragraph 2368, and it summarizes the teaching when it says, "For just reasons, spouses may wish to space the births of their children. It is their duty to make certain that their desire is not motivated by selfishness, but is in conformity with the generosity appropriate to responsible parenthood. Moreover, they should conform their behavior to the objective criteria of morality." And in the encyclical Humanae Vitae, Pope Paul VI says, "With regard to physical, economic, psychological, and social conditions, responsible parenthood is exercised by those who prudently and generously decide to have more children, and by those who, for serious reasons and with due respect to moral precepts, decide not to have additional children for a certain or an indefinite period of time." In my previous recording, where I talk about my perspective on conceiving children, I kind of go through my personal discernment and how I utilize, or how I use use the church's teachings, and how I kind of personally apply that to my life, because obviously every scenario is different. And so I do think that's important to at least just touch on the end here. I can't speak to any particular person's situation. It's such a personal discernment within marriage between the spouses to discern what their grave reason is, why they have those, how to, change that or move things around. And so I don't really feel like I can really particularly talk to a certain circumstance. I definitely think in general, there are a lot of excuses that people make with having or avoiding having children. I think there are both camps of couples who determine not to have conceive another child for selfish reasons. And I also think that there are camps of couples who have children in an irresponsible manner. So I think both are there. And I do touch on that in the episode, but in my previous recording that I did. And I want to add here a point that my husband made that I really liked in regards to responsible parenthood. So in the catechism where it says it is their duty to make certain that their desire is not motivated by selfishness, but is in conformity with the generosity appropriate to responsible parenthood. In regards to responsible parenthood, if for whatever reason you think that it would be irresponsible for you to conceive of another child at the moment, or you're in a place where yeah, you feel like it would be irresponsible for, different factors of just the state of your home, the dynamics of your family, maybe your marriage, like something like that. It's important to not just let it stop there where you go, okay, it's now is not the best time. It would be irresponsible to bring in a child, but then to go a step further, to be responsible, to practice responsible parenthood is to also make movements to become a responsible parent. So if you don't feel like you are encapsulating that right now in your life or in your marriage, it's your duty to be moving towards that point where you are a responsible parent. And sometimes I think it is easy to kind of look at our lives and assess, okay, now is not the right time, but then stop it at that and not do anything about it. Because I don't feel like I can particularly speak to an individual's scenario or discernment, I do think it's good to point them out. And I thought that instead of speaking to those things in particular, maybe giving just some questions for this couple to ponder, for you to ponder in your heart as you're discerning and talking about with your spouse the trajectory of your family in regards to children, and kind of giving yourself an honest reflection of where you're at in conceiving children. If you're in a place where you are looking at things selfishly, or you are maybe being irresponsible, or you're not taking ownership or proper responsibility for your life and your role as mother and life bearer. Anyway, so again, I'm just gonna go over them. So the conditions that Pope Paul VI lays out for grave reasons are physical, economic, psychological, and social. So I'm going to go through each of them and maybe give some questions, thoughtful questions to ponder. And not to say that if you respond yes or no to any of these following questions, you do or don't have grave reason, but these are just questions that I came up with to help one ponder if they do truly have grave reason, and that you're asking these questions to be intentional about that discernment, because it's something that we ought to be intentional about. So the first condition is physical. Am I making an effort to care for my body? Are there ways I can be investing in my body to put it in an optimal state for pregnancy? And if I've discovered that there may be a health concern, am I doing the research, seeking out the help that I need? Psychological. If I am afraid of having a child, am I making efforts to heal, work on the fear and anxiety or the other mental attacks I'm experiencing to feel or become more ready? What lies do I believe about myself that make me uncertain? Is my marriage in an unhealthy state? And are we doing anything to improve that? Financial or economic? Asking yourself, do we need to adjust our standard of living and sacrifice some things? Do my husband and I have to have a serious conversation about making more money, especially if I'm at home with children and my husband's wage is not sufficient to supporting a large family? Do we need to move to a place where we can afford to live better and afford better? And then social, a lot of people refer to social, or like the scenario of social, like for being at war, like your country's at war. And that's typically not the case, but maybe another question could be if you do feel like there's social unrest where you are, to ask yourself, do we need to move to a more stable country or province? How can we make that happen? What do we need to do to get those things in order? So those are some questions I just thought of to ponder in your heart and to talk about with your spouse. I mean, the reality is that a child doesn't pop up instantaneously. Like, you conceive a child, and if all is well, they don't come out for another 9 months. I understand that some people have really tough pregnancies, and that can definitely be a massive factor in it. Especially, I've heard of some pretty intense pregnancies where mothers are, bedridden and sick and really out of commission while they're pregnant. And obviously that would go under physical if that's a reason for you guys to discern. But if you don't have a ton of physical or health concerns while you're pregnant, and all things considered, pregnancy does go relatively smoothly for you, besides the typical fatigue and nausea at certain points, I would just encourage you to reflect on the fact that, yeah, like conceiving a child in that moment, that doesn't mean you're going to have that child tomorrow. And you have time to, think and pray about and rearrange your life and order your life and figure things out with your spouse. You have time to kind of prepare for that child. And so if you look at it in the context of, okay, you have 9 months, at least a lengthy period of time to make some concrete changes in your life. If those things could be done in that time, I would encourage you to reflect on, okay, is that really then like a grave reason? Like just because you're afraid in this moment doesn't mean, or there's something that's going on in that moment, doesn't necessarily mean that's going to still be there 9 months from now. Or maybe you feel like, oh, I'm not ready right now to have another child. And I mean, really the question is, are you ready to get pregnant right now? Because the child is not necessarily coming in that same moment. So something to kind of think about. I mean, at the end of the day, I do think it's something that we really ought to just like in and of itself in this topic, in conceiving children, in life, in our journey with our Lord. Surrender is kind of the crux of it all, giving ourselves completely to Him, allowing Him to radically change our lives in ways we couldn't imagine, to give ourselves totally to Him. And I think it's important to not make decisions out of fear, because the implication of fear is doubt. Like usually when you're afraid of something, you are afraid because you feel a sense of doubt or uncertainty or unrest. But I don't ever think making decisions from fear or out of fear is a good spot for discernment. And I think we can all do better to trust in the Lord in every aspect of life and all things, and especially when it comes to our marriage, comes to our family, and the plan in which He has for those things. I'm going to wrap up here. Ultimately, I think it's good for people to have sufficient knowledge of their fertility. I think that's a gift from God that He's kind of given us, the ability to know our bodies. And I think a posture of surrender, humility, wisdom, and openness to God's plan for our families. I think it's important to seek out good counsel and not just operate on our own understanding of these things, to realize that the Lord's ways are not our ways, to be diligent in knowing what Mother Church actually teaches and being faithful to that, and not sort of conjuring up our own interpretations from that and ordering our lives that way as if God is demanding something of us that maybe He's not, potentially. And ultimately, I'm coming up from a place of children are a gift from the Lord. And not only are they a gift from Him, they are His. We have been tasked, we are given the great honor and blessing of being able to care and form His children. I don't think that should be taken lightly. Forming them, raising them, loving them is a tremendous, weighty task, and it should never be disregarded, and it should always be approached with a posture of gratitude, of humility, and of honor. So I'm going to end with this scripture verse. Psalm 127 verses 3-5 says, "Behold, children are a heritage from the Lord, the fruit of the womb a reward. Like arrows in the hand of a warrior are the children of one's youth. Blessed is the man who fills his quiver with them." Thank you so much again, folks, for listening today. I'm excited to see you in the next one. Bye.